You are now watching the amazing Mets Pregame Show with your hosts, Rob and CP.
Let's go Mets! Let's go Mets! Let's go Mets! Let's go Mets!
What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to the amazing Mets Pregame Show right here on both of our channels and on both of our X accounts. How is everybody doing on this Tuesday, Subway Series Edition 2.0? Well, guys, we are ready for some little bit more New York against New York baseball. 7 train against the 4 train, all ready to go in the Bronx this time. Unfortunately for the New York Mets, we got a little bit of bad news when it comes to Christian Scott going on the IL with a strained UCL, and that puts a little bit of a situation when it comes to the rotation. But I think we have our opinions and plans in place for our 6-man rotation. Chris, how are you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I could have done without the Christian Scott news for sure. That kind of blindsided me. I know we've been having conversations about this rotation, conversations about Kintana, who's pitching tonight, Christian Scott, etc. But that's just a tough blow for me because I was actually just very curious to see how that situation would unfold and whether they would have actually moved him to the bullpen or kept him in the rotation long term. But at this point in time, he's not healthy. The UCL sprain is what they're calling it initially, but we've seen cases in the past where they call it an initial sprain and it ends up being something much worse in terms of the surgery actually needed. So for all you Mets fans out there, take this injury with a grain of salt. Like I said, I'm not trying to instill worst case scenario here, but definitely be on the lookout for updates regarding Christian Scott. But other than that, hopefully the rain holds up today. I'm very excited for some Subway Series action. And we'll talk about this series, and hopefully the Mets finish up strong before this ever so crucial series against the Atlanta Braves.
Yeah, absolutely. And they did gain a game on the Atlanta Braves, or almost everybody yesterday. Almost everybody we needed to lose lost while the Mets won. And yeah, it's unfortunate with Christian Scott. Again, I still think it's not the biggest blow, even though I know you're a big fan. It's not about being a fan of Christian Scott. It's just the situation that he was put in with the New York Mets. Look, it's not Christian Scott's fault that they take him out of ball games and give him a pitch limit, right? That's just how teams work nowadays, and the players just abide by it. And look, he hasn't even thrown that many innings and throwing that many pitches, and we got a UCL scare right now. And look, it's not only going to hurt us in the present, could hurt us in the future. So hopefully he's going to be okay, and we don't get a worst case scenario when it comes to his hopefully not getting Tommy John in his UCL. So that means before we get into the series against the Yankees, we talked about in the group chat, is it going to be Jose Butto going to the rotation as the Mets get towards the trade deadline a week away, and maybe they do go out and get two bullpen arms instead of maybe one? Is that going to be the case? Or are they going to use Tyler McGill, as we talked about in the chat briefly before we came on here? Is it going to be Tyler McGill that gets thrown back into this rotation, which I think might be the better idea? I know people don't want to hear that, but if you bring in Jose Butto, you're going to lean into that Christian Scott situation of innings limit because he's not stretched out. You're not going to throw him in the rotation to pitch 3 innings. Doesn't make sense. And the Mets can't afford to do bullpen games right now. So Jose Butto might be best to stay in this bullpen because you need to stretch him out, and you can't send him down to the minors because you need him in the bullpen. And if you need him in the rotation, it's going to take 2 or 3 starts to get him to where he needs to be stretched out. So I'm thinking Tyler McGill is probably going to be the next man in line to fill that Christian Scott spot in the rotation. And it's not the worst thing in the world. You know, some people are bringing up James Paxton, DFA. Yeah, I guess. But we do have guys that we can use. You know, maybe the Mets like one of our younger arms and maybe bring him up. I don't think that's a good scenario either because you're falling into the same line of innings limit and pitch count like you did with Christian Scott. So what is your thoughts, Chris, on what do you think the Mets might do, or your opinion of what you would do if you were Mendoza and Stearns?
Yeah, I see some conversations happening in the chat, and salute to everybody in the chat. Obviously, when I made the poll that's in the live chat right now talking about your confidence level in Jose Quintana, that was pre-Christian Scott. I made it before that news dropped, and now the landscape of the rotation changes, like not too much because as you said and as Oliver said in the chat, like he hasn't pitched that much for the Mets anyway, so it's not a tremendous blow. I'm just kind of just peeved at the way the Mets handled the Christian Scott sort of situation and just the outlook of the future in terms of if he's going to need inevitable surgery or not. But nonetheless, to I believe the question of I forgot who's talking about it. Steven, Joey Lucchesi is still in the minor leagues, if I'm not mistaken. He got DFA'd and then he cleared waivers, got outrighted to AAA Syracuse once more. So I do believe he is in the equation. Tyler McGill is also down there. Zach saying something about Mike Vasil as well, although he hasn't pitched up to par this season so far. There's a lot of options in the short term the Mets could utilize. Jose Buto, obviously, with the sort of impact that he's had on the bullpen, if you're not going to replace that pen arm, you would need to replace that pen arm, but with who if you bring Jose Buto back into the equation? I simply think that the Mets rotation, even pre-Christian Scott injury, needed a boost. And now with this Christian Scott injury, it needs a boost more so than ever. And I'm not even talking about internal. I'm not even talking about reworking your rotation to bring Jose Buto in or bringing up somebody from the minor leagues. Like Tyler McGill, I could see as that Band-Aid effect and that quick patch, given the recent news of Christian Scott today. But that is, if the Mets are playing the long game and trying to build a rotation that's sustainable and making a playoff run, there's no way you're going to convince me that an addition of Kodai Senga, who will also be presumably on a limit in his first couple of outings at the very minimum, plus a Tyler McGill, is going to move that needle for the Mets. Now you come into a point where it's really inevitable in my mind, if you're really going to build the best rotation that you possibly can in 2024 to make a playoff run, you have to go out there and get another starter. I know a lot of people are talking about James Paxton. James Paxton numbers weren't pretty whatsoever before he got DFA'd. I'm not quite sure I want to patch this rotation with another old veteran lefty when the Mets already have one, Jose Quintana, and we don't know what he's going to provide consistently for the Mets in the second half. I'd like the Mets to go out there and make a bigger move. I'm not saying they need to make a big splash at the deadline for a premier starter, but I'm saying a mid-level starter would not hurt to act as insurance for Christian Scott. And that, to me, would signify the Mets front office being prepared at making a playoff push, more so if they just relied on the addition of Kodai Senga outright and a guy like Tyler McGill or Lucchesi or even a Vassal or whoever else you want to name coming from the minor league. So, like I said, I'm going to have to sit here and look at these mid-level starters in terms of who's going to be available. We all know the guys that are the premier starters that are going to be on this market. Like we mentioned last stream, this is always subject to change. But I think you and I might be on the same page of the Mets not really going out there at the deadline and being the big players for the big name guys. They might be in line to get those mid-level relief pitching, the relievers, or the mid-level starters, or a mid-level bat. Like, let's say, like I've been saying for the last couple of weeks, like a Michael Conforto, even though everyone wants to push back on me with that. Like, I'm not expecting a huge deadline, but you never know. Things change by the day. News clips drop by the day, like with Christian Scott. And David Stearns is not in a one-size-fits-all scenario.
Yeah.
We said a couple days ago, Rob, that over the next week is going to be a big indicator. Each and every day is going to be a big indication in terms of what the Mets are going to have to be prepared to do at the deadline. And I think that this is playing out to a T, exactly how we called it. And at the end of the day, mindsets can change. And I think that everyone needs to be prepared for that. And David Stearns surely needs to be prepared for that.
Yeah, over the next, 8 games, including today, right? Unless the Mets go 1-7, there's a pretty good chance, even if they go 500 over these next 8 games, they're going to be right in the mix because nobody, again, we see it once again, right? The Mets haven't played that great in the month of July, yet they gained games and got into a wild card spot. That's the difference. That's why I'm saying, how important the big June was, because you don't have to play great baseball in the month of July. And, there's a pretty good chance that on July 31st, we are talking about the Mets making trades. Now, I don't think they're going to go after a starting pitcher. I think they're 100% focused on relievers, at least 2. Now, we can debate on if it's going to be high level, mid level, A tier relievers, B tier relievers. Maybe they can swing a deal for a Fetty, as somebody brought up, a couple of people brought up in the chat. I don't think it's going to be the big name starters. I don't think that makes much sense for the Mets. And when it comes back to going back to who's going to replace Scott, I could see them going after James Paxton, but whoever fills that Christian Scott spot, it's probably going to be a journeyman. It's going to be either a Tyler McGill, a James Paxton. I don't think it's going to be anybody much better than that. Because, look, if you do go into the playoffs, you're shortening up your rotation anyway to probably 4, regardless of, and especially in the wild card series, you're using 3 guys. So, and even in the divisional round and even probably in the NLCS, you will go the 4 starters, probably not 5. So those guys who are going to replace Scott or whoever it might be is not going to be a part of this rotation. Maybe in the bullpen, but they won't be in this rotation if they do make the playoffs and go on a run here with an extended series. So I don't think that Tyler McGill or the James Paxton situation is going to affect the playoffs if we do make them.
If I might interject here, one name that I've been kind of looking at, and I've looked at him in a positive light ever since his Cleveland days, is Rockies pitcher Cal Quantrill. He's a guy that makes a lot of sense to me. He's got a 4.15 ERA right now, and I really don't think, he's got good stuff. He's got good life on his fastball, but you don't think of him as one of the premier gets. And also, we all know the Rockies situation. They're going to be sellers. They're not thought of as a team around the league to be kind of tough to negotiate with, I guess, so to speak. So I really do think that Cal Quantrill, especially with the change of scenery, maybe perhaps a little bit more of a pitcher's friendly ballpark than what Coors Field is, can kind of turn it around. And if you want to get the most value, the most bang for your buck, I do like the name Cal Quantrill a lot. So I would just urge everybody in the chat to sort of keep an eye out on his market. And that's, if I had to give you one pitcher around the league that I think would be a great fit, first and foremost, but also be a realistic option for the Mets, I think Cal Quantrill is a name to watch out for.
Yeah, that might be a good option. It won't cost you much at all. And do you agree that whoever replaces Scott is only for these next 62 games, because this is, or 63, including today, because it's game 100 today? Do you think that's only for these next 2 months and not for an extended period where you're going to see this either McGill, Buto, whoever you want to put in, Paxton, Quantrill? Do you want any of those guys? Are one of those guys going to be a part of your quote unquote playoff rotation if the Mets do make the playoffs? Because that's going to be an important topic to talk about if we get that far.
So are you saying whoever is acquired will be a candidate to be a playoff pitcher for the Mets? Is that what you're asking me?
I think anybody who's replacing Scott, even if it's in-house or on the trade market at the deadline. Because I don't think they're going to be a big part of this rotation in the playoffs if the Mets do make it. I think they're going to be a big part of it in the next 2 months, but not a part of the playoff scenario rotation-wise. Because you shorten up your rotation in the playoffs.
Yeah, it just depends, especially, I mean, obviously the wild card is definitely the thing that's in play here for the Mets, and obviously you got a 3-game set to make it out of. So I do think for the wild card, it'd be a little bit of a stretch to imagine that. But let's say the Mets make it to the divisional round. I think that whoever the Mets acquire definitely will be a part of that grand scheme of things. But for a wild card series, it would be hard to imagine. Although I will say you'll have Kodai Senga, you'll have Luis Severino as your top 2. It's going to be a battle in terms of who's hot at that very given moment. And if you bring in a guy like Cal Quantrill, listen, I don't want to throw shade at your guy. I know Jose Quintana is your guy, Rob. But I might have to evaluate who my third starter is going to be, even if Quintana's the vet. So I don't know. Like I said, I'm just personally high on Quantrill because I've been watching him for the last couple of years and I like what he possesses. Okay. And I'm not saying this is a foregone conclusion. I'm just saying that's if I had an ideal target to replace Scott in a 1-for-1 scenario, given that Cal Quantrill's on an expiring deal, he only signed a 1-year deal, I believe, with the Rockies. That's who I would target. But I think that third spot is really up for grabs. I don't think it's going to be Tyler McGill. I would hope it's not a David Peterson because that's just asking for a disaster, right? That's a disaster waiting to strike. But I really do think that it would probably be if Kintana sticks around. Now, that's a big if. We don't know if the Mets go out and get a starter. Like, obviously, they could keep all of their rotation pieces as depth because you can never have too much starting pitching, especially in the second half of the season with maybe any other potential injuries. But yeah, I would say a very early outlook of it. It's possible that they might crack the rotation in the wild card series. But I do think whoever replaces Scott's automatically going to get most likely a start in the playoff in a divisional series. I mean, that you automatically have to expand your rotation if it goes to like 4 or 5 games. So I don't know. It's a hard tell right now, to be honest with you.
I'm glad you brought up David Peterson because I don't think David Peterson has gotten enough credit this year. After his injury, he's been one of the better starters in this rotation. Like he's been more consistent in over the stretch. Like, what is he, undefeated? Like, wins loss is not really a big thing anymore. I know his ERA isn't. I haven't checked his ERA, but I don't think it's great. But I think he's been probably our most consistent pitcher. I mean, he's one of the guys that hasn't really had a hiccup yet. Now, he is David Peterson, and he might, but I don't think we've been given. We haven't been talking about David Peterson enough, and maybe that's my fault for not bringing him up because I always think about it prior to the show, and I always tend to forget about it because I talk about Pete Alonso too much. But I think David Peterson might be an option because, look, the Mets had no problem throwing him right back in the rotation after his IL stint. So I think they really like him. And I think that David Peterson might be one of those guys that you might see in one of the rotation spots if the Mets, make a little run in the playoffs. I think that might be a possibility. So I'm really thinking that David Peterson might be one of those guys because, I mean, at this point, I trust David Peterson going out there. He gets out of a tremendous amount of jams. He puts himself in a tremendous amount of jams, but he's like Houdini. Like, he gets out of jams. And, it's hard to say that you can't trust the guy who consistently gets out of his own problems. So, and, he's been going a little bit more deeper in the games than in years past. So he might be an option going forward. So, I mean, look, there's a lot of questions when it comes to the rotation. Who is it going to be? We're going to find out very soon because in this Braves series, you have to fill that spot. So it might be a Tyler McGill at the very least at the moment, or it could be somebody else. We'll see if it's Jose Buto. Maybe McGill goes into the bullpen. Who knows? But it's going to be very interesting. So
I'll say this about David Peterson, Rob. I do like what I've seen from David Peterson. He's had that sort of knack to get out of those tough spots, even though he puts himself, like you said, in those tough spots. I do trust him more than a Tyler McGill right now, which probably isn't saying much. But at the end of the day, it's kind of hard to figure out if you trust him enough to go into the playoffs, right, in a playoff series. But at the end of the day, I don't think the Mets, if they don't go out there and get an arm or two in terms of the starting rotation, would have much of another choice. So that's kind of what we're faced with right now.
Yeah. It's going to be very interesting what they do. And again, the Mets are always making this season interesting from highs and lows and roller coasters. And again, I don't think Scott was a huge difference in this rotation, as I spoke about with you guys in the group chat. And I said multiple times on shows, not that I don't believe in Christian Scott. That's not the case. Like, I think he's going to be a good pitcher. How good? That's yet to be determined, but I think he's going to be a very solid pitcher. I think he can definitely be a number 2 and probably a high mark. He can be an ace. He got that type of stuff. I just don't think it's worth it keeping a guy in a rotation like that the guy could be pitching great. You're taking him out after 5 innings, maybe, if he goes that far, depending on pitch count. So I think that's a rough way to go about it when you're trying to win ball games and also protecting an arm. And look what happened. They tried to protect an arm, and now he has a UCL strain. So how well did they protect him? Not the Mets' fault. It's just that's the way, you try to extend them a little bit, and they probably didn't want to. I don't think the plan was to bring up Christian Scott this year. In some type of race late in the season. Like if it was, the Mets in their quote unquote transition year, everybody thought this was going to be, then you can really control their innings and pitch count. But you're trying to win, and as good as he might be in certain games, you're still taking him out. And I think that's a rough way to go about it. So it's going to be very interesting over the next, his next time through the rotation. Who is it going to be? And I'm pretty sure it's probably going to be McGill. Even if the Mets do trade for somebody, I don't think they're going to throw him in right away. Depending on where's that guy in his rotation spot, he might not be available on Christian Scott's day. If they do get a James Paxton or a Quantrill going forward. But with today's game, we got the Subway Series. We got Jose Quintana, which I tend to agree. We all talked about it in the group chat, and I want to see if everybody agrees in the chat with what we brought up about Jose Quintana. This is a big start for Jose Quintana. Not only when it comes to possibly the trade deadline, and he might be a part of a trade, which I don't still think is going to happen, but, he don't pitch well. Who's going to really want him? That's the other issue. And on top of that, we need him to pitch the way he did in June. We need him to be that good. He needs to step up here. And listen, Yankee Stadium is a son of a bitch, right? It's a ballpark that is not easy when you don't pitch in it every fifth day or at least consistently enough. You can shy away from certain pitches. You can, instead of being a pitcher that likes to throw inside to lefties, you might not want to do that in this game because of the short porch in right field. Like, it can get into your head. And I know Jose Quintana is a veteran. I don't care who you are. When you go into Yankee Stadium and you got that short porch, and even left field isn't very big, right, down the line, right? Obviously, the biggest gap is the left center field gap in Yankee Stadium. It's a very small ballpark. It can get into pitchers' heads who don't pitch there enough. So today, it is a big game for Jose Quintana. Not only is it first, what he has 2 more starts before the deadline today, and his next start, which will probably be against the Atlanta Braves. It's a big start because not only do the Mets got to stay in a wild card spot, but try to get the 4 games over 500. Try to win a season series against the Yankees, which is not the end of the world, but it's important, right? It gives Met fans a little bit of, all right, we took care of the Yankees. Let's do our job. Now we got bigger fish to fry. We got the Atlanta Braves coming up. So, Chris, I want to ask you, we all believe that Jose Quintana, today's game, is very important to him. But what are we going to get from him? I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, we all know the I guess discussions that Yankees fans are having on social media right now, and the I guess frustration that they're displaying about the lineup that Mr. Boone threw out there for tonight. So we'll see what happens. But like I said, I'm always wary of every single Quintana start. I know he was on a little bit of a hot stretch there before the Colorado game. Colorado game comes up. The Mets are looking to sweep a series, and he lays an egg. So, like I said, I just don't know, and this is what makes me just not convinced with Jose Quintana for the rest of the second half is like, again, like most other Mets starting pitchers right now, not named Luis Severino and maybe even a Sean Manaea, David Peterson, Tyler McGill, Jose Quintana, which version of that guy are you going to get on any given day? It's really up in the air. And the same thing went for Christian Scott. As much as I like Christian Scott before he went down with an injury, to your credit and to your point. So this is why I stated the rotation was going to be my biggest fear in the second half, is because you have a rotation that's full of guys that really haven't proven much consistency whatsoever. And that is always my biggest fear, especially in a stadium like Yankee Stadium tonight. Like I said, I'm rooting for the best. I'm rooting for Jose Quintana to shut my mouth, just like every other single Met that I've criticized this year, for me to shut my mouth and for them to shut my mouth for me so I can stop criticizing them about poor performances. But at the end of the day, like I said, the Yankees lineup is not really hitting the ball all that well either. Juan Soto just had a multi-home run game the other day. Aaron Judge is knocking the cover off the baseball. Outside of those two guys, I don't want to say and back up what Luis Severino said the other night to his Yankees buddies in the group chat that they got, but the lineup isn't at their strongest, and we all know that. So it's going to be a tale of two factors: the Yankees lineup and how good or not good they are versus the actual stadium itself. Like I said with Quintana, he's still a very capable pitcher. He doesn't have to throw 95, 96, right? He doesn't. And he doesn't at all, whether he's struggling or he's performing well. He throws 91 to 92 miles per hour. Well, if you're not locating it, if you're not making your pitches competitive, you're going to have a very tough time against any lineup in the MLB. And that's exactly what we saw in that last game in the Rockies series. So I'm rooting for him. I hope he's able to make it 5, especially now that Edwin Diaz had a little bit more of a lengthy inning yesterday than we had hoped. And by the way, we haven't mentioned a single time in this podcast episode or this pregame show that the Mets literally landed in New York at 5:15 a.m. today while the Yankees are well rested. So listen, I don't really know how tonight's going to play out. The rain, we still don't know what the conditions are going to be. You know what we're going to get with Yankee Stadium with the short porch. Hopefully, transitioning a little bit more into offense, because SNY Mets on X posted a tweet saying, I forgot who it was, the other player that has more home runs in Yankee Stadium since they've been in the league than Pete Alonso, but Pete Alonso's second in that category. This is just me grasping to straws right now, hoping that Pete Alonso turns it around. Because I'm sorry, Daniel, for in the chat. I apologize for bringing up Pete Alonso again, but really, we need this guy to get going. So I'm rooting for Jose Quintana. If I had to put a guess on his outing right now, in terms of the stat line, I don't think he's going to strike many batters out. I'll give him 4. I'll give him 3 strikeouts, 5 innings pitched. Let's call it 3 earned runs, and that should be enough.
I'll take that.
And I'll take that all day long, and that should be enough for the Mets to stick in the ball game and keep on pace and on par with the Yankees today.
You know, I'm glad you brought up Pete Alonso, not because I want to criticize him, but of course I will. But he's been very good at Yankee Stadium. He has great numbers at Yankee Stadium. He always seems to hit a big home run at Yankee Stadium. I was there for one of his home run, couple of his home runs at Yankee Stadium. He has really good numbers at Yankee Stadium. You saw Pete Alonso yesterday hit the ball hard to the right side, which got me very excited, even though it was on the ground. I believe he got 2 hits yesterday. He had better at bats, taking more pitches. I know he hasn't been great, right? He has 2 home runs and 5 RBIs, if I'm not mistaken, in July. And we got a week left of July. It's not a good month for Pete Alonso. But we've always been saying, as much as I criticize Pete Alonso, I still feel like he's going to have a month of elite Pete Alonso, peak Pete Alonso. I just feel like he just has to have 1 month, because as of right now, he ain't catching 40 home runs. He's not getting to 100 RBIs if he's playing the way he's been playing. He's not getting there at all. And again, I don't care about individual numbers, even though it overall helps the team, but he needs to be better. We all know about that. You put up you did a live the other day about Pete Alonso's numbers. That was a big. I did a Mets Talk live yesterday talking about it, as well as you went more into depth than I did. But it's a concern. It really is. But I was gonna say this before you bring it up. Pete Alonso, I think he's gonna have a crazy 2 games here. Now, I don't know if it's going to be solo home runs. I don't know if it's going to be with men on base, because he hits with nobody on base. His numbers with people on base are terrible. And that's the biggest problem from peak Pete Alonso to what you see now of Pete Alonso, who's having his worst year of his career at this moment. Again, he has 2 months and a week to change a lot of minds here, but it is a problem. Huge problem. And I just feel like he's going to do it. Why not? These next 6 games, how beautiful would it be for Pete Alonso to just break the hell out against the Yankees and the Braves? Because if we need him right now. With JD Martinez struggling, with Nimmo kind of struggling a tad, Lindor is getting his hits. He's doing his home runs. But even Lindor hasn't really been getting the big RBIs as of lately either. So I will get on those guys a little bit. But they've been carrying the team the last month and a half. So I can't really – it's hard to kill them. But Pete Alonso, if he can carry this team over these next 6 games here, it would be so helpful for this team because he's the one guy in this lineup that has not had moments of the season yet, like Lindor, like Nimmo, like Martinez, like Viento, like Jeff McNeil recently. Even Jeff McNeil has found some life. And I think McNeil is going to pop one over the wall in right field today as well, as he's been finding his power and finding his stroke at the plate and hitting the ball much harder as of late. So I don't know about you, Chris, but I think the Mets are going to have a big night tonight. Now, I think the cold start tomorrow, it's going to be a very tough game. Like, I'm running out of here with a split. I think anybody who thinks that a split is bad against the Yankees right now in Yankee Stadium, you're crazy. You're delusional. But I'm not saying don't think high. Like, I want to sweep and beat the shit out of the Yankees. I can't stand them, right? I want to shut up a lot of Yankee fans that always are on my channel just killing me, and all my friends back home in New York, I want to kill them as well. Now, I work with a lot of Mets fans now and very little Yankee fans, so it's more fun to not really deal with it much, but I just want to beat them up because it just gives you more momentum into the Brave series, because I can care less about momentum for Yankee series. I want that momentum going into the Brave series, where there's a pretty good chance the Mets could be where they are right now, 3 games back of the Braves, or even closer to the Braves in that series. And the Mets would have an opportunity for a number 1 wild card spot going into that series. That's why it's important for this series to do some damage. Not because we beat the Yankees, which is always fun, but because of the momentum that can take us to Atlanta, Chris.
Yeah, I agree. That's what it's about first and foremost to me. Like I hope they use this series as a bridge to go into that Atlanta series, which is going to be ever so pivotal now that the Mets are quite literally 3 games behind the Braves. And if I told you at the beginning of the season that on July 23rd, the Mets would only be 3 games back of the Atlanta Braves, let's forget about the Phillies, right? Because I was honestly higher on the Phillies preseason than you were, Rob. I know that for a fact.
Absolutely.
So, I would take it all day long. And I think that series really is what matters. And I think that this Subway series could be a potential confidence booster for a lot of guys. So, and primarily Pete. And now that Jeff McNeil's looking like a different version of himself, him as well. But we have to give credit where credit's due. The opposing pitcher for the Mets, or against the Mets today, is a tough pitcher. They actually handled him quite well back in the first go around of the Subway Series at Citi Field. But Luis Gil, he's coming off of back-to-back starts against division rivals, the Orioles and the Red Sox, that is, of 6+ innings pitched and only 1 earned run. So this is going to be a very tough task for this Mets lineup. I like this Mets lineup, and I hope that they're up to the challenge. And that's all I'll say. But like I said, you cannot underestimate Luis Gil, and obviously the guy that's going for them tomorrow in Garrett Cole.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last time the Mets faced Luis Gil, he was going through a bad stretch when they faced him. He had a couple of bad starts in a row prior to playing at Citi Field. So he is a guy that actually, look, he has great stuff, right? And he's been much better, as Chris just said, he's been much better going into the game against the Mets than he did the last time. And remember, Garrett Cole, it was his second start facing the Mets, for the season. So, Garrett Cole got a couple of games, a couple of starts, a decent amount of starts now going into tomorrow's game, and Luis Gil is pitching better than he was the last time the Mets faced him. So it's going to be a big test for the Mets, right? I would have to give the pitching matchups, obviously, to the Yankees, but when the Mets are scoring runs, it doesn't matter who's on the mound for that opposing team. They score runs, right? They scored 6 yesterday, right? I know it was a close game considering how dangerous it looked late in the game, but they did score 6 runs, right? They're starting to get that situational hitting down a little bit more, and it's creeping up a little bit better over the last game or so, and I like to see that. And again, Yankee Stadium, it's very hard not to score runs in that damn ballpark. Like, guys that need to hit the ball over the wall, need to hit the ball over the wall. Like, there's no excuse right now. You know, you can pop up a ball to right field, get a home run. We pop up balls all the time to right field. That's like our trend, especially guys that are struggling. So let's get it done tonight, guys. We're gonna get Chris with his final words. I think Pete Alonso is gonna have a big night, and I think Jeff McNeil is gonna have hit a ball over the right field wall today, over the Little League wall, as I like to call it. So, Chris, your final thoughts for Game 1 of the Subway Series in the Bronx, and let everybody know what's going on with your channel, either later tonight or the next couple of days.
Yeah, unfortunately, no post game for me tonight. Most likely no post game tomorrow, but I am available for the pregame tomorrow if the game is going to be on. I know there's going to be some inclement weather. Hopefully, the weather holds up tonight as well. How about Luis Torrens? Like everybody's saying in the chat here, how about Luis Torrens gets a little bit of revenge for the Yankees selling low on him and having their own catching struggles of their own right now on their roster? A lot of Yankees fans that I see on the TL are not happy about who's starting for them tonight. And you know what? It's just a blessing that David Stearns was able to get Luis Torrens in the doors of the New York Mets. And that 1-2 tandem with Alvarez and Torrens has been absolutely fantastic. So, like I said, and like you said, this is a bridge series going into a way more important. The rivalry's nice. Don't get me wrong. We always like the rivalry and we like the bragging rights, but this is a bridge to a more important times 100 series against the Atlanta Braves at home, kicking off in just a couple of days. So really hope that Kintana goes out there and is able to have his command. Really hope the bullpen, we don't know if Edwin Diaz is available tonight or not, but hopefully they hold their own as well in that park. And let's just hope and pray and everything else that you like to do as a superstition in between, we need to do to get Pete Alonso going. Yeah. Because like I said, this lineup will not be at 100% of its full potential until Pete Alonso gets going. And I apologize about that. That is my buddy. That's my good buddy. But yeah, no, absolutely 100%. Pete Alonso needs to get going, and hopefully that Yankee series and his numbers historically at Yankee Stadium are going to prevail tonight. So
yeah, and that's a great call by you, and your final thoughts, Luis Torrens. I think that is a huge decision by Carlos Mendoza, who's probably doesn't get enough credit sometimes for certain lineups he put together and players he puts in at certain moments, because he could have easily put in Alvarez today, and he did not. And that is big. One, former Yankee. Right? You know, when you face your former team and they kind of gave up on you, you want to do some damage. So maybe Torrens is going to have a good night too, as he's been very good for us as our backup, and probably at this moment has been better offensively than Alvarez as of late. So, or mostly since he's been here. And nobody's running on Torrens, right? And I'm not worried about behind the plate. Like Alvarez has struggled throwing guys out, but Torrens just guns people out like crazy. So, with that said, guys, Game 1 of the Subway Series 2.0 in the Boogie Down in the Bronx. Mets, Yankees, Kintana, Heel. Are the Mets going to prevail tonight, go to 4 games over 500, and get that much closer to the Atlanta Braves? We're going to see what happens, guys. Enjoy the game tonight. Let's go, Mets. Beat those Yankees. And we'll see you next time, guys. Have a great night. Enjoy the game. Let's go, Mets.
Let's go, Mets.
Meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have the time of your life, because the Mets